This video contains spoilers for a few of Hollow Knight's major bosses. What's the deadliest attack in Broken Vessel's arsenal? Is it the aerial strike, the slam, or maybe the cascade? Nope, it's this one. Hello, I'm Holland, and this video is an attempt to address and propose a fix to one of my main issues with Hollow Knight's combat. I've made 4 videos on the game so far, and in 3 of those I've already mentioned this issue. To avoid having to repeat myself even more in the future, I'm making this video now so that I can direct people here if they want to know more about what I've dubbed the repositioning problem. To briefly define the term, a repositioning move is any effort a boss makes to change position in the arena that is not part of an attack. However, some attacks that involve repositioning, such as Broken Vessel's slam attack, may face similar issues and as such will be included in today's discussion. Regardless of whether a move is being considered an attack or a reposition, I argue that both are attacks. In fact, every time the hitbox of the boss moves or changes, the boss is in practice performing an attack. And this is simply due to the fact that when touching most bosses, you take damage. This is what I refer to as collision damage. If you couldn't take damage from touching a boss's hitbox, there would be no repositioning problem. But as it currently stands, a boss's character model is as much of a weapon as their nail or mace. So to put it simply, as long as a boss can deal collision damage, there is no difference between that boss moving around the battlefield and performing an attack. So let's say we can agree that a repositioning move can be just as deadly as an attack. We could then ask the question, what makes for a fair attack? And is that philosophy applied equally to repositioning moves? Before Hornet performs a lunge, she crouches down and brings back her nail. Before False Knight performs a slam, he primes his mace for a moment. Before Umu summons lightning, he discharges some electricity, and so on. An indication that a boss is about to perform a specific action is often referred to as a telegraph. Telegraphs usually warn us that an attack is coming and gives us time to react. The shorter the time between telegraph and attack, the quicker we must be to respond, and the harder the attack becomes to avoid. So what happens when an attack doesn't have a telegraph? Let's say a repositioning move that Team Cherry doesn't consider an attack. Well, it often is still possible to avoid such a move. If you know that Hornet can jump straight up into the air at any moment during her fight, you can just avoid ever being right above her. You can even start to suss out when it is safe to jump above her, such as when she's staggered, when she's in the middle of an attack, or right after one. When you start to rack up hours against bosses like Hornet, you slowly get a feeling for when you can be in the air and when you're running the risk of being hit by a rogue repositioning move. But hold on, what are you doing now? Are you picking up on a telegraph and skillfully responding to it using your knowledge of the fight and quick reaction time? No, you are not. You are realizing that even though the boss might perform a bevy of other moves, there's a chance that she'll randomly decide to jump at you and put you in a situation you can't react to. And so, instead of reading a telegraph and responding, you're trying to preemptively avoid an attack that would otherwise be unavoidable. And while repositioning moves aren't the only type of move that can put you in a situation where it's impossible for you to avoid taking damage, they are the most common offender. It is my firm belief that reading a telegraph and responding accordingly is the primary stimulus-response framework that makes Hollow Knight bosses so fun. It's what creates a feeling of you dancing with the boss. But when you have to play it safe to avoid a poorly telegraphed attack, you're not expressing any capability other than caution, and that is neither fair nor fun. And again, to hammer this point home, I'm not saying that the way Hornet moves around the arena makes her impossible to play around. Obviously, that's not the case, since professional players can beat her 100 times over without taking damage. What I am saying is that those players then have to employ a playstyle that limits airborne movement. And because being in the air during a fight feels so natural and fun, any limits put on your ability to do that is a real shame. It's the difference between learning to respond to an attack and learning to be scared of one. I'll probably have lost a few of you by now, but hopefully some of you will be able to agree with me that 1. Repositioning moves can be just as deadly as regular attacks, and 2. Any attack that isn't telegraphed properly restrains your free movement. For those of you to which that makes sense, let me give you the good news. I think this problem has a number of potential solutions, so let's talk about them. Again, to reiterate, the problem is this. When a boss performs an untelegraphed action that puts the player in danger, they are essentially limiting the time in which the player is allowed to traverse the arena freely, and instead forcing them to remain in a certain area, usually on the ground, if they wish to avoid running the risk of taking unavoidable damage. Here is the first potential solution. Solution 1. Bosses don't deal collision damage. Some bosses in Hollow Knight already avoid this problem completely. Umu, for example, has a very slow and predictable repositioning move. Another, the final boss, which I won't show here to avoid spoilers, doesn't deal collision damage whatsoever. Therefore, one solution to the repositioning problem might be to remove collision damage from bosses altogether. Besides making a lot of bosses potentially seem less threatening without collision damage, the biggest problem with this fix is that it quickly becomes unclear what exactly damages the player. Take False Knight for example. If he doesn't deal collision damage, but only his hammer does, what about the hilt of his hammer? And what about when he lands on you? Isn't that part of the attack? And what about bosses like Dunk Defender, who has an attack where he rolls up into a ball and jumps around? That should obviously still deal damage, right? It all gets confusing quite quickly, and exactly when a boss can damage you really can't be ambiguous. It has to be quite clear. Solution 2. Bosses don't deal collision damage while repositioning. Okay, so let's say that bosses just don't deal collision damage while they are repositioning. Well, when is that exactly? How do you know precisely when a boss is considered moving and when they aren't? And again, what about Dunk Defender? Is that ball move a reposition or an attack? And how exactly do you tell the difference? Maybe this is a solution, but I feel like we can do better. Solution 3. All bosses teleport. As mentioned previously, one type of boss that avoids the repositioning problem altogether is one that doesn't move a lot or deals no collision damage. Another type is one that teleports. Now, teleporting enemies don't have the best reputation in Hollow Knight. When and where they teleport to can feel random, and it's annoying to have a boss leave your vicinity or even the arena entirely. But consider a boss like the Soul Master, who teleports predictably and leaves the screen for no more than a few seconds at a time. I think he solves the repositioning problem almost perfectly, and it's one of the main reasons I love his fights so much. But is this solution appropriate for all bosses? Maybe and maybe not. Soul Master is, after all, a soul user, and his teleports can be explained through magic. But even so, other bosses that don't use magic use teleporting as well. Hive Knight and Hollow Knight can both vanish and reappear before one of their attacks. So perhaps teleporting can feel like a martial move, rather than one having to rely on magical means. I think this solution is right for some fights, but it also does limit boss design quite a lot. Solution 4. Bosses telegraph their movement properly. The final solution I have leans fully into the idea that repositioning moves are attacks and as such require the same kinds of telegraphs. Picture Hornet spending an additional second crouching down before jumping upwards. You could easily imagine how that would allow you to get out of the way before she made contact with you. But it's not just when a boss decides to perform their repositioning move that matters, it's also where they want to go. I bet you know that feeling of dashing to avoid a boss's jump and then realizing too late they weren't going where you thought they were going and dashing right into them instead. This happens because bosses like Hornet, Crystal Guardian, and Broken Vessel seemingly choose the target of their repositioning move at random, and it's impossible to know where they're going before they've already gone about halfway. Now, how would you go about fixing that? One solution is to give the boss a set repositioning location. One fight that does this well is Brooding Morlik. When Morlik jumps, he first targets the player's current location. Because you obviously know where that is, you never have to guess where he's going. Then, he jumps back to the middle of the arena, which is also perfectly predictable. But what if you don't want the boss to always be jumping at the player or at a set location? What about a boss like Hornet who needs to be able to move more dynamically? Well, how about this? When Hornet wants to jump to a certain location, she first has to indicate exactly where she's trying to go. This indicator could either be tied to the specific boss, such as, let's say, Hornet throwing a yarn that trails silk behind it at a specific location, revealing where she wants to go, as well as the exact trajectory she's about to take. It might also be a simple white aura, either at the location the boss is going to or showing the trajectory as well. This aura could then be implemented as a baseline for all bosses with repositioning similar to that of Hornet and Broken Vessel. This would be subtle but detectable. It would give the player a chance to respond and risk damaging them if they didn't. It could either be tied to the specific boss, which would look awesome, or be common amongst all bosses, making it less intrusive. And best of all, it would give the player that much needed freedom of the skies, the ability to float far above the ground, fighting with the boss without risk of taking damage from smacking into them. Although having some bosses teleport is definitely a valid fix to the problem, I think this final solution, having bosses telegraph their repositioning moves as if they were attacks, is both elegant and widely applicable. Whether or not you think I came up with a proper solution to the so-called repositioning problem, I hope we can at least agree that it's a real issue, and that Hollow Knight is a better game when its bosses require skill and knowledge to beat rather than fear and luck. Because as long as bosses can jump around the arena without a care in the world, they prevent us from doing the same. Thank you so much for watching, and be sure to comment skill issue down below if you disagreed with everything I said but don't have time to come up with a substantial rebuttal. And have a wonderful day. Bye!